Hello, welcome back. This is episode 2 of my knitting podcast. This episode is dedicated to my mum, my number one fan in real life and also in knitting. She's just a wee mum, you know. I've got a lot to get through today. So we've got 2 finished objects. I've got 3 whips. I'm going to run through acquisitions. And I'm also going to talk a bit about a special project that I'm working on that I might do some more in-depth content on separately. But first off, what am I wearing? This is the partner pullover by Lydia Morrow, or what Lydia made on Instagram. It is knit up in Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino. The light pink colour I think is called Dusty Rose, and then the darker purple colour is called Bordeaux. I had such a journey with making this jumper. I nearly gave up on it about 3 or 4 times. I first cast it on, I think, in April of last year, so April 2024. And I finished it in, I think, November of last year. I did take a really long pause throughout that time over summer because it's quite a thick, heavy knit, and really it's about winter. It's for winter. So I did take a bit of a break whilst I was making this. But when I picked it back up, it was because I was going on a 3-week long holiday. So I went to Japan for 3 weeks and I took this as my project for that holiday. I really ambitiously said, I think, maybe I said this on Instagram or posted it on stories or something, that I might have it to wear in Japan, that I might finish it on the 12-hour flight over there and then have it ready to wear when I got there. I think that ambition, that hubris, really came back to bite me in a big way because it was not finished by the time we landed down in Tokyo. And actually, it was barely progressed by the time we left Japan. It was starting to really frustrate me. The way that it's knit is that you start from the bottom and then you knit up the body, and you do the same for the cuffs. So then you have a point where you bring all 3 of those bits together. They're 3 separate bits, and then you join them all together. And I think I probably did that joining exercise probably 3 times. Certainly more than once. Certainly I think more than twice. Maybe I'm being dramatic to say it. No, I'm not being dramatic. It was 3 times. I definitely cumulatively added on an odd number of sleeves to get to this finished garment, in the sense that I added on the left sleeve, it was wrong, I brought it back, and then I added on both sleeves again, it was wrong, I had to bring it back. So it ended up being, as a whole thing, like 5 sleeves that I added to the body, if you count it that way. It was really disheartening. There's something really particularly painful about pulling those parts apart so that you go from having what you think is one project back into its constituent parts. It's really demoralizing. But I did manage to join all of those bits together. But my troubles, they were not over, because as I knit up and started to put together the shoulders, I had originally wanted to make the folded collar version of this pattern. As a side note, it's a super variable pattern. There's loads of different styles that people make of partner pullover. I went for this squiggly design, but it's all a grid, like a 9x9 grid, maybe, repeat. And the pattern has some checks. It has a striped version, which is quite similar to the Rumble Raglan design that Lydia Morrow also has, which is really popular. I've got one of those, and I think it's a great, absolutely great pattern, a really great design. So the pattern is super variable, and it has 2 neckline options, either the turtleneck, like what I've got, or a folded collar. And originally I'd thought I would make that folded collar, but as I was making it up, I was like, no, I want something really, really, really warm, and I think this will feel nice on my neck, this yarn. So I think I want the turtleneck, but I wasn't sure that I had enough of the yarn to make that. I'd bought all of the yarn originally for the project from my local yarn shop, but I did that in April last year. By the point I was thinking about this, it was October, it was November. I wasn't sure whether they were going to have the same dye lot still in the shop. And I've definitely been burned by different dye lots on Knitting for Olive yarn before, which is absolutely, it's fine. That's what you expect with a different dye lot, but I have seen quite noticeable differences when you have those two together. And as with a lot of yarn shops, opening hours can be sometimes a little bit difficult if you work the standard 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, which is what I do. So I was not sure whether they would still have it in stock. I wasn't sure when I was going to be able to go out and get it. I had kind of sent them a message and then I hadn't heard back, but I think that, you know, if you're running a local yarn shop, you're not always kind of available for the whims and desires of anxious knitters like me. So I hadn't heard back. I ended up emailing Knitting for Olive, emailing the Olive people to say, do you have this dye lot? I'm absolutely desperate. I went through all of Ravelry looking for people who had 30 grams, 40 grams of the same dye lot that I was looking for. And I had no luck searching through people's stashes and searching through things on Ravelry. So I really was starting to get a bit worried that I wouldn't get this, and then all of this would have been for nothing. My last thing that I could do was to cycle out to this yarn shop over my lunch break. So I went for like a very sweaty cycle, told people I'd be back in an hour, went to the shop. I thought it was closed, but they just had the door locked. And then I eventually managed to get in and to get the yarn that I needed because they still had one ball left, I think, of this. So I managed to just get in there. But my troubles, were they over? No. The third issue that I had with this is that when you get up to the back of the jumper, which I've not done a lot of bottom-up jumpers actually. So obviously normally when you're doing the back short rows, that tends to be one of the first things that you do in a pattern. But for this, it was one of the last. And I'd already struggled with understanding the instructions to join all three bits together. I'd panicked about managing to get this last ball of yarn. And then I got to the end of this and I thought I'd made a mistake because I couldn't make the short rows work. I checked. It seemed like I'd followed the pattern. I eventually ended up making a spreadsheet to try and figure out, right, if this, you know, if the short row is here, like if it ends there, then how many stitches should be left. And I came to the conclusion that there is, at least for my size, which I think was a size 4, there is a mistake in the short row shaping of this pattern up at the top. I put notes about this on my Ravelry, and I think it's the same if you're knitting a size 5. So if you make this pattern and then you come up to the top and you cannot make the stitches work out, it's not you, there's just a slight issue. Actually, it's super easily resolved. I just basically continued knitting. I think I put all of the details on Ravelry, so if you're looking for a fix for it or to see how somebody else did it, then please go and have a look at that. But that was the other final thing, the kind of final straw. I was nearly ready to throw all of this in the bin, but luckily I didn't because short row shaping is fine. I really like the jumper. I think the jumper is absolutely great and it's so warm and it's exactly what I had pictured in my head. And it's probably one of my top knits ever, one of my favourite ever knits. The second one that comes immediately to mind as being a favourite knit of mine is the Curious Crop, which is another Lydia Morrow design. And it's also knit up in Knitting for Olive in the colour Bordeaux. So clearly I know what I like. I like Lydia Morrow designs and I like Knitting for Olive Bordeaux. I'm a simple girl. The one thing that I will say about the mistake in the pattern is that I've knit maybe 5 Lydia Morrow designs and this is the first time I've ever had any problem with them or ever had anything which is less than the ultimate best practice, I think, for any designer to make a pattern. She is standout, one of my favourite designers for fit, standout designer for fun ways of using colour, and for slightly more challenging things. And then the accessibility of her patterns is also really good. Loads of different ways to view it. She does charts, she'll write it all out, she'll have tables for things. So basically anything that you would hope to see in a pattern, she has an option for you. I can't praise her designs enough, honestly. The other thing about this pattern, so obviously I got a pair of earrings that I think really closely match. Will I come close and show you my ear? Yeah. How similar is that colour? I mean, isn't that colour just almost exactly the same? I bought these earrings in a craft fair in Richmond, where the jewellery maker was selling, obviously, her own jewellery. And I was wearing this jumper at the time, and then we both kind of looked and we were like, wow. because I thought it really did match. I thought it was perfect. I thought I had to get that. Isn't that great? The one other thing that I'll say before I finish this segment on what I'm wearing, I also knit a scrunchie. So when I finish a design, I tend to try to make a scrunchie out of scraps. I didn't use all the scraps left from this jumper. I've still got quite a lot of both colours left, and I got one ball as well of Bordeaux in a different dye lot in case I couldn't get that first one. It's so simple to make a scrunchie, obviously. You just kind of cast on the number of stitches that you want, knit it up, and then wrap it around a bobble that you can just buy at any shop, and then knit the two pieces together like a knit two together around every single stitch, but picking up from the cast on edge, that's what I did for this. I think there's loads of free patterns for scrunchies out there. I don't think anyone should really have to buy a pattern for a scrunchie. It's so simple to make. I have a lot of different scrunchies, and they're kind of like little mementos of things that I've made. I quite like looking at them all together in the same way that you might like looking at all of your gauge swatches for all of your projects, for example. The thing with this is it's a little bit too thick to really scrunch, in a satisfying way. I had this slight idea that what I would do is put my hair in a bun, like a normal tie, and then I would put this round as a sort of decoration, and then have it poke over the top of my head, kind of like that, kind of like a Renaissance painting halo. That was my vision. That was my vision. I don't know whether that's going to look nice or not, and I haven't tried it. And I also think that if I was wearing that with the earrings and the jumper, it might look a little bit much. Like, we get it. We get what you like. But I could just wear that separately as its own thing, and maybe that would be really nice as well. So, yeah, that's that. But that was a lot of talk about what I'm wearing, and we haven't even really gotten onto what I've yet done. But that's the difficulty when you're starting out on this knitting podcast thing, is that I have loads of things that I've made, and loads of them have like long stories associated with them, and I want to tell you all those stories. So that's how that ends up happening that way. But I hope that was kind of interesting. The first finished object that I'm going to talk about is... ta-da! It is the Valentine's Bralette, which is a design by Ching Fiber. And the yarn is also from Ching Fiber. It is Veronita. This deep blue is called Deep Sea. The cup is knit in the colour Snapdragon. I don't think either of these colours are available anymore, unfortunately, but they were both like really great. I think they work really well together. They look really nice. I knit also the Valentine's thong, which is part of this set. I made that last year for Valentine's Day, and I finished this one off for Valentine's Day this year. So now I've got the set. I finished the thong last year, and I think I had never really truly worn it. I think I've worn it like once or twice as a kind of like, just to have a bit of a laugh at myself. And I guess it is important to know whether these function as garments, even though they're not like highly practical garments. I really think this one is going to get absolutely zero wear out of it at all. And that was not the purpose of making it, right? I didn't make it because I thought I was going to have a really good structured piece of underwear. I made this for one simple reason, and that simple reason is silly, silly fun. And that's the only thing that I can say about that. So yeah, Valentine's bralette. I'll put a picture of the set up on the screen here for you to see. The bra is slightly pinkier than the thong, and the reason for that is because this cup is the 2 strands of Vernita that I mentioned, but I also put in a bit of this ball of yarn from my stash. So if you've seen my stash tour, I talked a little bit about this, but I'm really not sure exactly what this is. It, I think, has come from various bits of yarn that I got from my granny that she had. There's only one ball of this, and you can see obviously it's got like a bit of a halo to it, but it's thicker than I would traditionally see like a lace mohair. So I think it might be maybe a 4-ply mohair or something like that. I'm really not 100% sure, but because I've never really seen anything like this before, and I don't have a tag, and nobody knows what it is. But it has worked out really well for giving this a bit more bulk, because I wanted this to be slightly more opaque as a fabric than the thong was. So that's why it's a slightly different colour. The other thing that I've done with this is that I sewed in a cup each from an old sports bra that I had that had cups in the lining, which I took out because personally I don't think that you need cups in a sports bra. You know, I don't really care about shaping. I definitely don't care about padding. So I took both of those out. They were kind of just getting in the way and annoying me. But I saved them specifically for this because I thought it would add some nice shaping to the bralette pattern. So that's the kind of major modification that I made. I also did change the pattern slightly just so that it would fit neater around the cups that I had. Again, I think I put some notes on this on Ravelry, but I don't know how comprehensible they are. Probably not very comprehensible at all. The way that I did this is that you start with making this band, you insert elastic into the band, and then in the original pattern you kind of start to cast on there and then knit up and make this strap. I then, after having made the band, sewed on the cup and then did the same thing and cast on for the cup around the band again, and then knit up and over and then stitched the cup to the cup. The stitching is so bad. The stitching is so janky. I showed my sister, who's a lot better at sewing than I am, and she, I think, genuinely, she burst out laughing. But I'm going to show you the worst version of it. It's not great, that, is it? I think this is becoming a theme here on the podcast. I'm just not very good at sewing, but as long as it holds, that's the main thing, and nobody's going to see this apart from everyone who watches this video and myself. But the main thing was that this just got attached. You know, that was the main thing. I'll show some little details up on the side because nothing wants to focus on the screen, but there's like a strap bit so you can adjust it. And there's also this ring bit like you might have in a sort of traditional bra. And then it goes around the back like that and then clasps together at the front so that you have opens like that and closes like that. So the original pattern had a cross back. I just did a normal over the shoulder and back because I thought that would have a little bit more structure to it. I think, you know, really I should have just made what I thought was a bit prettier and should have just gone with the original design of the cross back because, as I said, I'm not really going to wear this. It's just more to have it, and as the sort of slightly different experience of making something like a bra. It's a fun project rather than something that I necessarily am going to get a lot of wear out of, you know. It's just silly fun. Anyway, that is my first ever knitted bra and the first finished object that I'm showing you today. But it's not the first finished object of 2025. That is my, ta-da! It's the beret. The beret I mentioned in episode 1, and at that point it was basically done, but I had said I needed to weave in the ends and I needed to do a block, and I said I wasn't yet 100% sure whether I was going to do that and have this object be my first finished object. I was a bit unsure about whether it suited me or not. I wasn't really sure whether I was going to wear it outside. Update is I have worn it. I've worn it outside. I wore it to the opening weekend of my partner's exhibition in London. The exhibition is called Making Egypt, and it's at the Young V&A, and it's a kids exhibition, so for 7 to 11-year-olds. This is a bit of a shameless plug, but I went there over the weekend, and you know what? It was really, really good, and I really enjoyed wearing my beret. I felt a little bit like a children's presenter, but then that felt like it was, in context, a good thing. It's still so bitterly cold here in London that I was just grateful for a bit of warmth on my head, and I didn't really wear it in a sort of standard beret way. I wore it more like a beanie that was pulled down over my head, but it kept me really warm, so grateful for that. Yeah, I think I've come to terms with this beret, you know? I'm not going to rush to make another one. I'm not suddenly going to be wearing berets every single weekend, but I think that as a finished object, I'm quite pleased with it. I mean, I just think the colour is so good. What do you think? Like, I think it looks so good. So yeah, that's my other finished object. So we're going to talk about works in progress now. I'm only really going to talk about active works in progress. I did talk about the Campanula tee last time. I haven't yet cast that on. That'll probably be my first summer knit, so I'm just going to pause talking about that until the time comes. However, one of the knits that I did talk about last time, one of the works in progress, is still around, and that is my Lanark. Last time I talked about the Lanark, I think I had the collar and then the body. I have obviously a little bit more body now. A little bit more body. I have one sleeve and the beginnings of a second sleeve as well. This fabric is still amazing. So it is, I don't think I said last time, but it's a sort of wool silk blend, like 90% wool, 10% silk. And it came on this cone from the Lanark spinning mills. I am a bit concerned now that I am going to run out of yarn, which I just never in my life thought that 500 grams of DK weight yarn would not be enough to make a jumper. I didn't really think it through. So the yarn doesn't have meterage on it. So I have a slight excuse in that I didn't know exactly how much yarn I actually had. I also think, looking at this, that even though it is double knit, it's quite thin. It's not very like double knit-y, you know? It's a bit thinner than I was expecting, actually. It's a bit thinner than I'm used to for DK weight yarn. So I haven't done the ribbing for the body. I haven't done the ribbing for the first sleeve. I also need to do the facing, which is the bit around the collar. So that'll be, again, a bit of a drain on yarn. I think I have enough to do the facing and to finish a sleeve, but that might be wishful thinking. I might be completely wrong about that. I'm just going to keep going with it. see how long it takes and see how far it's going to take me. I weighed the cone before I started the first sleeve, and I had 186 grams of yarn. Sorry, the cone weighed 186 grams. That obviously includes the actual cardboard cone bit, which I have no idea how much it might weigh. Then I weighed it after having done the first sleeve without the ribbing, and that sleeve had taken 66 grams. So in theory, there's about 120 grams left. In theory, that might be enough, but this cardboard bit would have to be really, really quite light for me to get away with it. So I might not get away with this. So I spent a bit of time being a bit unhappy, a bit disappointed, because I really thought this was going to be like a very sexy Banshees of Inisherin style knit. And I'm coming to the realization I'm probably going to have to do contrast ribbing at the very least for cuffs and for the bottom of the body. So might be a little bit less sexy Banshees of Inisherin and might be a little bit more sexy Balamori. Sexy Balamori is an oxymoron. Sexy Banshees of Inisherin is a tautology. So yeah, it's not going to be quite how I envisioned it. I've not yet decided what sort of contrast I'm going to do, whether I'm going to go for something really bold, or I'm weighing up whether I want to do a low contrast rib, maybe in brown, or to have something that picks out some of the speckles of this and maybe do it more high contrast and have a white ribbing at the bottom, or potentially a kind of grey to it. I think the brown will probably be a bit more wearable for me with the rest of my wardrobe, but the white might be nice, or the grey might be nice as well. But I think I would want it to maybe be a cream colour rather than like a steely grey. I do tend to prefer warmer colours on me than kind of cooler ones. So yeah, that's update on whip number 1. I'll pop this over to the side. The second whip that I'm going to talk about, you've already seen this before, so I'm just going to really briefly talk about halibut cowl. This hasn't, I say it's an active whip, but it hasn't really had a lot of progress since the last video that I filmed. It's still kind of at this early stage. And the reason I wanted to talk about it, I have made some progress on it. So I have knit up a couple more rows, but I said in the last video I wasn't really 100% sure about it, that it was going to be a bit scratchy. It is obviously, it's pretty rustic, this yarn. It might not be very nice around the neck. And I was saying, well, I don't know if I'm going to continue with it, or if I'm going to line it potentially, or if I'm going to just pull it back. I have now finally made a decision on it, and the decision is that I am going to keep going, that I'm going to finish it off, and that I probably will line it if I decide that it's just too scratchy to wear. The reason I came to that conclusion is because I don't want to use this yarn for anything else, and I think it's as good a project as anything to make this yarn into. I could view it as a practice run, and then I could also make another halibut cowl in the future if I wanted to. There's absolutely nobody saying that I can't do that. But the major reason why I don't want to tear this back is because, as I said last time, I've been knitting this with loads of tiny, tiny little balls of yarn. I'll spare showing you the bag of yarn yet again. But that means there's a lot of ends to weave in. You can see where I haven't done that. And when I first was starting with this and I hadn't really appreciated that it was going to be scratchy, I was weaving one end in after every row that I did in order to reduce some of the burden of weaving in ends at the end of the project. So I did that, and that means that I've woven in probably double digits worth of ends already. And I did that to be proactive so I wouldn't have to do that again. But the idea of then coming back and like unraveling those bits that I did proactively to save myself the hassle at the end. I just can't be bothered. So I am going to finish this off. That's my decision. I'm going to line it. If I decide that I don't want to line it, somebody else on my first video made a really good suggestion that you could turn it into a sort of little throw pillowcase. So you could just literally sew in the bottom potentially, and then have the design and then have a little pillow in it. And I think that would be really nice as well. I think I would really enjoy having like a tiny little pillow that's made out of this. And it'd be more of a decorative piece than something that you really want to cuddle. And I think that's absolutely fine. So that's the plan. I'm going to keep going and finish it off. Gosh. Okay, the last active whip that I've got is, and this is quite exciting actually, it is my ranunculus. So here it is. So I am knitting this in Ching Fibre Melted Baby Suri, and the colour is Sky Spirit. I talked about this in episode 1. I've been on a bit of a roller coaster with this project. I cast it on last weekend. It's probably about a week ago now, because I wanted something to take to the theatre. So I took this on the tube in London, and then I also sat and knit on this in the theatre. So my mum was down visiting in London, and I took this to the Globe. We went to go and see a play, and I sat and knitted on it whilst we were watching the play. That might seem a bit strange to people that I do that, but I'm such a fidgeter that if I don't have something to play with, then I'll end up making noise and it might disturb other people even more. So I felt like I needed to have this thing to kind of keep my hands occupied whilst I was watching it. And also, whilst my mum was down, we went about London quite a lot. So we were traveling about all day. Crossing London takes so long, and I just cannot face the idea of doing an hour-long tube trip without a project to knit on. So I needed to cast this on. And as I say, I have been on a bit of a journey with it. I'm currently knitting it on these a very short cable fixed circulars. So it's 6mm, and I just couldn't find my 6mm interchangeable tips. So it's a bit of a shame, because I wish I could kind of show you the yoke, how it looked, but I can't lay it out properly yet. And I also haven't tried it on yet, so I'm not really sure if it's going to fit me properly. So I've just been kind of carrying on with it. I am almost at the point where I'm going to split for sleeves. So I've obviously done the neckline, I've done the lace yoke, and I also have done the raglan shaping. It is knitting up really fast because it's on the 6mm, so it's just going by, it's just flying by. But also I've not been very precious about this, so it is absolutely riddled with mistakes. Like I've messed up on the lace a few times. I think I messed up on the raglan, but it all worked out in the end. All the stitches worked out towards the end of the raglan. I think that the benefit of doing something in this fluffy yarn with the level of variegation that comes with this colorway means that mistakes are really not going to show up at all. So it's kind of freeing to knit something where you're like, it doesn't need to be perfect. I don't need to have this perfect seam. I don't need to have these perfect raglan increases. It just can be a bit of a flying knit. Let's like make something really quickly. I also think that really soon it's going to get into the stage where it's just stocking stitch going round and round. And I think it's really useful to always have a mindless project that you can just reach for in moments where you're literally just adding length rather than having to worry about counting increases, counting stitches, that sort of thing. So I think it's always good to have at least one project like that on the go at any one point. And this is she for me right now. But I did, as I say, go on a bit of a journey of whether I like this or not. I know that there's a little bit of discussion, there's a little bit of discourse around variegated skeins and how to use them best and whether they actually knit into objects that people like the look of at the end. And I think that was part of the journey that I sort of went on with this, because this is the skein of yarn, right? And I think objectively, this is a beautiful, beautiful thing. It is really lovely to see something like that. And when these are hanging in the shop, or like when you first get them and when you're looking at them, you just think, wow, that's amazing. You just think, wow, that's truly spectacular, right? Just seeing that is just a lovely, wonderful thing. And then when people knit it up, and I have been, I think, a bit guilty of feeling like this in the past, sometimes you get a bit disappointed because it has this stripy effect, which is kind of like stratigraphic, like a stratigraphy, which some people I'm sure really like, but it is quite different from the nice melding of colours that you see when it's on a skein. And I definitely have opinions about where it works better and where it doesn't quite work. And I think things that I don't particularly like with variegated skeins are pure stocking stitch projects. That just doesn't do it for me. I don't think it looks great, especially when there's very high contrast in the colours in the skein. I thought this was quite low contrast, so I thought it would work for the stocking stitch sections of the ranunculus, but I think that where variegated skeins look best is in lace. That's when it tends to look the best. So I was a bit disappointed with how I felt this was turning out. You can't really see a lot of the lace. Once it's blocked, I'm sure it'll open up a little bit more and then it'll be a bit clearer what the kind of pattern is. But so far, it's not particularly obviously different from the stocking stitch bit of the raglan that I've done. The other thing that I didn't realise about the ranunculus, and I'm just terrible for this, I never read patterns through when I buy them. I just think, yeah, I'm just gonna go for it. But I didn't realise that the lace yoke is ungraded. So every size just does the same lace yoke. And I'm not a designer, but that doesn't feel right. Like, surely you want to have differences in how that shows up at that point. Like, surely you do. But I have since kind of come round to this. I'm starting to enjoy the overall effect of this. It's maybe not exactly what I pictured, but that's no bad thing. And I'm still really excited to have this, and it's just knitting up so fast that by the time I've decided whether I want it or not, I'll probably already have it. So it's not going to stop me from just continuing on with it, finishing something off, and then trying it out with different outfits and seeing how it looks. So I'll bring this back to a future podcast, obviously, and let you know how that goes. But tell me if you've knit a ranunculus before and what the experience was like, because it's a real Marmite pattern. I think some people really do hate it. And I have definitely seen people who have knit it before say they would never make another one. And I'm not yet at that point, but I haven't tried it on yet. I've just kind of been enjoying the process. I just think there's a couple of little strange things to it. I would be very interested to hear your thoughts on the ranunculus if you've made it or if you've not. Tell me if it's useful to have a kind of perspective, another perspective on the most knit pattern on Ravelry. So that's the last of my active whips. That's my knitting pile, my pile of blue, still all blue. In the spirit of Finish It February, I'm just going to try and finish off a couple of those. So I'm just going to try and finish off the Lanark and finish off the ranunculus this month, and then I'll treat myself with a new cast on the 1st of March, regardless of whether I actually do finish it or not. That's just my treat to myself. That's my plan. There are 2 sort of final sections to this podcast, and the first of those is acquisitions. I mentioned in episode 1, I'm buying no new yarn this year, so my acquisitions for episode 2 are nothing. 0. So I managed to stick to my resolution. The only thing that I have bought knitting related since last time is a set of new interchangeable needle tips in the 6mm size so that I can transfer my ranunculus onto a longer cable and then try it on and get more of a sense of how it's knitting up. That's the only thing that I've bought. I think I just lost the previous pair. I don't know where, I have no idea where they are. And I think ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, having a new set of needle tips is probably not a bad idea. You might break one or lose one or whatever. That's the only thing that I bought. I don't have it yet to show you because it's still in transit by the gods of the UK Postal Service. May they smile upon you. May they smile upon me. May they smile upon all of us. But they don't tend to. So that's the only thing that I bought. Acquisitions, nothing. And then the last bit that I just want to really briefly talk about, and I'll do probably a fuller video on this. I mentioned that I've got some projects that are sort of fixing things or changing things up or giving a bit of pizzazz to something. My project for this month is to fix up an old coat that I have. And that coat, I wear it probably every single day during winter. I've had it for like 8 years. I bought it in a kilo sale, which I don't know if it's a worldly thing, but we have them here in the UK on occasion. And the concept of it is that you go and you pay for whatever your items weigh. So if you go and buy 5 tops, if they're all really lightweight summer tops, you could end up paying the £10 per kilo for 5 items, which is obviously a bargain. But if you're buying a massive coat, you might end up paying £40 for that coat because it's a heavy coat. And that's what I probably ended up, or that's what I think I ended up paying for this coat. Since then, I don't think this was the case when I bought it, but since then, the pockets have fallen apart, the lining has got holes in it, it's got little holes elsewhere, and it's the smallest thing that I could think of that I should do to just really improve my day-to-day life would be to fix those pockets. I'm going to fix up all of that, I'm going to patch it up. I made a little patch from a sashiko making class that I went to a couple of weeks ago. That patch will probably go on the lining. And the concept for this is like a kind of cozy wall of a Scottish tavern pub. But I want this to feel very makeshift, very keen for it to look like it has layers, because it's in the lining. Nobody will really see it unless I kind of am showing it to them, obviously. I also have some patches that I have bought at various points, thinking that I might be cool enough to pull off a patch. But again, I think being on the inside of a coat, I'm probably okay with pulling that off. And then the idea is that I might do some more sashiko stitching there as well. So please do let me know if you're interested in following along with that. I am planning on kind of filming the process and sharing it back in a short form video rather than a podcast episode, because otherwise it would just take up all the time on this thing, and it's not strictly about knitting, it's just another creative thing that I'm up to. I like to think about and talk about how we can mend and repair things, and a lot of knitters and a lot of crocheters make a lot of stuff, and I think it's nice when I hear how people maintain the things that they have, how they mend things, and that's what I want to do in this sort of segment, is talk about how you give things a new life and how I can use some other skills and some other kind of crafty things that I'm interested in. So I hope that's interesting to you as well. I think that brings me to the end of everything that I wanted to talk about. Thank you so much for watching. Since last time, I've had a real think about how I can improve the video quality, how I can maybe improve some of the stuff that I'm talking about. So if you're seeing that, if you're noticing that, please let me know, and please tell me what works for you and what hasn't worked for you. I was a little bit overwhelmed with the response to the first episode that I put out. There was lots of really kind comments. It was really lovely to dip a toe in and to feel the water was warm. So I'm not necessarily expecting that this is going to have the same level of response, but if you have watched this far, please do consider maybe subscribing or liking the video, or if you have some thoughts on what I've said here, then please do share them with me again. I got real genuine joy out of reading all of those comments. So it doesn't just go into a void, it doesn't just boost an algorithm, it's a real person here on the end who is interested in hearing what you have to say. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. It really means a lot. It's a massive investment of your time, and I don't take that investment lightly. So I really appreciate it. See you soon.